Hey guys, welcome back to another Algebra 2 video. Today we're going to talk about using the discriminant. So I've mentioned this word a few times as we've been talking about the quadratic formula. And the discriminant is just this fancy part here underneath of the square root symbol. It's the b squared minus 4 times a times c. And there's a lot that we can gather by figuring out what the value of the discriminant is without having to go ahead and solve all of the entire quadratic formula. So the discriminant tells me if there's going to be 2 roots, 1 root, no roots, if they're going to be rational, if they're going to be irrational, or when I say no roots, what I really am meaning is complex roots. And I want you to think about what this means graphically. So we know if we have a quadratic formula that crosses in 2 different places, these are 2 real roots. Now, whether or not they're rational or irrational, I don't necessarily know until I look at what the value of the discriminant is. But we also have places, oh, this one touches in 2, but pretend with me that this only touched right here in the middle. So I meant to draw it kind of like this. There we go. So it only touches on 1 spot. So this only has 1 rational root. And then we have we have parabolas that don't actually ever cross the x-axis, so they have imaginary roots because the roots are just where that parabola crosses. So if we look at the discriminant and the value of the discriminant is greater than 0 and it's a perfect square, then that means that we're going to have 2 rational roots. Like we could have, the square root of 4 is 2. So if we end up with a discriminant that's just the square root of 4, we know that we are going to have 2 rational roots, 2 and negative 2. And then it depends on, what we plus or minus and divide by. But again, we're going to have rational roots because it's going to give me answers that can be written as a fraction. If I end up with a discriminant, the number underneath of the square root symbol, that is still greater than 0, it's a positive number, but let's say like 37. It's not a perfect square, but it is a positive number. So I know I'm going to have 2 roots, and these are going to be irrational roots because I cannot take the square root of 37 and get a whole number. Okay, if I end up with a square root symbol that's 0, underneath the square root it's 0. Think about that. If I have negative b plus or minus the square root of, in this case, 0, all divided by 2a. So if I have a number here, let's say like 2 plus or minus the square root of 0. Well, plus 0 is just 0. Minus 0 is just 0. So I'm only going to have one answer. It's whatever this b squared is over the 2a is my answer. So we only have 1 root. And then if it is less than 0, if what's under here is a negative number, then we know that it's going to have complex roots. Negative square roots would be I, right? Negative number, take the square root of a negative number, we get I. So it's a complex root. Okay, so I tried to explain that quickly. But now let's look at it. Let's actually do some problems, and hopefully it'll make a little bit more sense if that didn't. So looking at this problem, we want to find the value of the discriminant. So we could plug the entire thing in, negative b plus or minus d, square root of b squared minus 2ac all over 2a. But we're only going to focus in on this b squared minus 4ac part. That's what's under the square root. So my b squared would be negative 10. So negative 10 squared minus 4 times the a value, which is 2, times the c, which is 7. So let's think about this. 10 squared is 100. 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 7 is 56. So 100 minus 56 is what? 44. So if I take the square root of 44, let's look at this. Is this a perfect square? No, it's not. So I know it's positive. It's greater than 0. So I know that I'm going to have 2 roots, but they're going to be irrational, 2 irrational roots, because I cannot take the square root of 44 and get a whole number. So I have 2 roots and they are irrational. So describe the number and the type of roots. The number, there's 2 roots, and the type, because this isn't a perfect square, but it's a positive number, they're going to be irrational roots. Irrational roots. And we can go back up here and look. We have not a perfect square, but it's greater than 0, so we have 2 irrational roots. Okay, so let's look at this next one. B squared, that's going to give me a positive 10 squared minus 4 times my A value times my C value. And we'll have to whip out my handy dandy calculator for this one. So we know that 10 squared is 100. I know that a negative 4 times a negative 5 is a positive 20. And 15 times 20 is 300. So I have 100. This is a negative times a negative, which is a positive. And a positive times a negative is a negative. So I have 100 minus 300. That's negative 200. Remember, this is what's under the square root symbol. The discriminant is under the square root. If I try to take the square root of a negative number, I know that I'm going to have complex roots. So my answer is complex roots. There will be 2 of them, but they will be complex. So 2 complex roots. All right, so using the discriminant, let's look at it. Again, b squared, so I've got 8 squared minus 4 times a times c. My a is 2, my c is 8. So 6 squared is 64. 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 8 is 64. 64, take away 64 is 0. So underneath the square root symbol, I have a 0. So let's think about this. If I plugged it in, it's negative b plus or minus b. We already did the whole square root thing all over 2a. Okay, so square root of 0, there's nothing to it. It's gone. So I end up with negative 8 over 4. How many roots is that going to give me? It's only going to give me 1 root. So I have 1 root. And the type of root, it's a rational number. Rational number. It's a rational root. So I have 1 root. It is a rational number. And again, we didn't have to do all of this. I just did it to show you where I'm coming up with the fact that I'm only going to get 1 answer. Plus or minus 0 is the same thing. If I would have had plus or minus 10, then I would have came up with 2 answers. Negative 8 plus 10 divided by 4. Negative 8 minus 10, then divide that by 4. That gives me 2 answers. But since it's a 0, adding or subtracting 0 does not give me a different answer. It's going to give me the same answer. So that's why there's only 1 answer for this type of problem. All right, so what you're going to do for this assignment, you're going to complete the even problems only. We're going to do 24 through 34, 36, 38, 40, 42, 44, and 46. So evens only, and you're going to show your work and turn that in, and hopefully if you have any questions, you'll reach out and contact me and I will be able to help you. Thanks guys, have a great day.